Chapter 1: The Old House. The house stood quietly at the end of a narrow street, its wooden beams creaking with the weight of years gone by. It was not grand by any means, but it carried within its walls the history of 3 generations. To the neighbors, it was simply the old house, a familiar sight with its tiled roof, peeling paint, and the small garden that bloomed stubbornly each spring. It was a vessel of memory, a silent witness to countless meals, arguments, laughter, and tears. Grandfather Min had built it with his own hands more than 40 years ago, back when the town was still quiet and fields stretched further than the eye could see. Now the landscape had changed. Cafes, small shops, and busy traffic surrounded the street, but the house remained rooted in place, a reminder of an earlier, simpler time. Inside lived 3 generations. Grandfather Min and Grandmother Lan occupied the small bedroom closest to the garden. Their daughter-in-law, Huang, and their son, Nam, lived in the larger bedroom upstairs. And then there were the children: Mai, a 16-year-old high school student, and her younger brother, Tuan, who was only 12. At first glance, the house seemed alive with people. Doors opened and closed, the kitchen smelled of stir-fried garlic and soup, and footsteps echoed on the wooden floors. Yet beneath the everyday noise, there lingered a kind of distance, an invisible wall that separated hearts even when bodies lived under the same roof. Grandfather Min spent much of his day sitting by the window, staring out at the small street. His health had declined in recent years, and he often leaned on his cane even within the house. Grandmother Len busied herself with tending to the garden, though her hands trembled slightly when she watered the flowers. She spoke less than she used to, her voice worn down by age, yet her eyes still carried warmth whenever she looked at her grandchildren. Nam, the father, often left for work before sunrise and returned long after dusk. He was an engineer for a construction company, and though the job paid well enough, it drained him. The lines on his forehead deepened each year, carved by endless responsibilities. Sometimes when he came home, he would sit in silence at the dining table, his shoulders slouched, staring at his bowl of rice without much appetite. Huang, the mother, carried the weight of the household. She worked part-time at a small local office, and when she wasn't there, she was cleaning, cooking, washing clothes, or worrying about the children's studies. She rarely complained, but her tired eyes spoke louder than her lips ever could. Mai, at 16, was in the turbulent stage between childhood and adulthood. She longed for independence, resented rules, and often locked herself in her room with music playing loudly enough to drown out her parents' voices. Tuan, on the other hand, was playful and energetic, but he often felt ignored. Everyone seemed too busy to pay attention to his small stories about school or his drawings of superheroes. Dinner was the one time the family gathered, yet even then, the silence was heavy. Chopsticks clicked against bowls, and the television in the corner filled the air with noise that replaced genuine conversation. Mai, eat your vegetables, Huang reminded gently one evening. Mai rolled her eyes, muttering, "I'm not hungry," and pushed a plate aside. "Don't talk back to your mother," Nam said sternly, though his voice carried more fatigue than authority. Grandfather Min watched quietly, sighing under his breath. He wanted to speak, wanted to tell them how fleeting life was, how precious each shared meal could be, but the words stayed locked in his chest. Even small moments revealed the growing gap between them. Tuan once rushed into the living room, holding a math test where he had scored a perfect grade. He shouted excitedly, "Mom, Dad, look, I got 100. But Nam was on a phone call, pacing with his briefcase still in hand. Huang was stirring a pot in the kitchen, distracted by the bubbling sound. Mai barely looked up from her phone. The boy's smile faded slowly as he lowered the paper, mumbling, "Never mind." Upstairs, Mai often lay on her bed staring at the ceiling, headphones blocking out the sounds of the house. She thought about her friends, her dreams of leaving the town someday, maybe even moving to a big city where no one would nag her about homework or vegetables. She didn't hate her family, but she didn't feel close to them either. Meanwhile, Huang sometimes stood at the sink late at night, washing dishes while everyone else slept. She would glance toward the quiet house, her heart aching. She remembered her own childhood, when dinners were full of laughter, when her parents asked about her day, when the house truly felt like home. She wondered if she had failed to pass that warmth on to her own children. In the garden, Grandmother Len knelt among her flowers, touching each leaf gently. She whispered to the plants as though they were her confidants, telling them how much she wished the family would talk more, smile more, love more. The flowers, at least, listened without judgment. The old house, with its weathered walls and groaning floorboards, carried all these unspoken emotions. It was filled with life, yet also filled with silence. The rooms echoed with footsteps, but not with laughter. And though no one admitted it aloud, each member of the family felt the same quiet longing to be truly seen, heard, and understood. They did not know it yet, but change was coming. Something would soon shake the fragile balance of their household, forcing them to confront not only one another, but also the bonds that tied them together. The old house, patient and timeless, waited. Chapter 2. Unspoken distances. Following weeks unfolded much like the ones before, days passing with quiet routines, each family member moving within their own small orbit. The house, though filled with people, seemed strangely hollow, like a stage where actors spoke lines that never quite reached one another. VNBN McNamee often returned from school with her backpack slung carelessly over her shoulder, her earphones already in place before she even stepped through the front gate. When Huang greeted her with the usual, "How was school today?" the girl would mutter, "Fine," without making eye contact, retreating quickly to her room. Huang sometimes stood at the bottom of the staircase, holding back a sigh. She remembered when Mai was younger, running into her arms with stories about her day. Now those stories belonged to friends she texted late at night, not to her mother. Tuan, meanwhile, tried to fill the silence with his own chatter. At dinner he would say, "Mom, today I played soccer with my friends. I scored a goal." Or, "Dad, look at this drawing I made of a robot." But more often than not, Nam was distracted by his phone, checking emails from work, while Huang was mentally listing chores. The boy's excitement would fizzle out, leaving him stirring rice grains with his chopsticks. One evening, as the family sat around the table, Nam's phone buzzed again. He answered quickly, his voice low but urgent. "Yes, sir. I'll have the report ready tomorrow." "No problem." Mai rolled her eyes, pushing her bowl away. "Can't you go one meal without that phone?" "Watch your tone," Nam snapped, his tired eyes flashing with irritation. "It's true," Mai retorted, folding her arms. "You're never really here, even when you're sitting right in front of us." The room grew still. Huang glanced nervously between her husband and daughter, wishing to calm the storm before it grew, but neither of them met her eyes. Grandmother Len reached for her tea, her hands trembling slightly, and Grandfather Min leaned on his cane, clearing his throat as though about to speak, but then remained silent. Later that night, Nam sat in the living room, staring at the flickering television though he wasn't watching. Huang joined him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "She didn't mean it," Huang said softly. Nam exhaled, rubbing his temples. "She did, and she's right." His voice broke slightly. "But what am I supposed to do? Quit my job? We need the money. We need the security." Huang wanted to tell him that she missed him too, that the house felt colder without his presence even when he was sitting in the next room, but the words stuck in her throat. Instead, she said only, "She's just a teenager. It's a phase." But in her heart, she feared it was more than that. In her bedroom, Mai lay on her bed with the glow of her phone lighting her face. She messaged her best friend, "I feel like no one at home understands me. Dad only cares about work. Mom's always busy. And Tuan is just annoying." Her friend replied with sympathetic emojis and promises that things would get better, but Mai didn't believe it. She wondered what it would be like to live in a family where people actually listened. Downstairs, Tuan sat with his sketchbook. He drew a picture of the whole family sitting together, smiling, their arms around each other. It looked nothing like reality, but he left it on the kitchen table, hoping someone might notice in the morning. When Nam came down early for work, he saw the drawing but barely glanced at it before slipping it aside to make space for his briefcase. Huang later picked it up while wiping the table. She smiled faintly, touched by her son's imagination, but then tucked the paper into a drawer, thinking she would show it to Nam later, though she never did. The unspoken distances grew thicker. Huang noticed how rarely Nam and Mai spoke without tension. She noticed how her son's laughter grew quieter each week, how her own parents-in-law spent more time in silence. Yet she kept moving, kept working, because stopping meant facing truths she wasn't ready to face. Grandmother Len sensed it most clearly. One afternoon she sat with Grandfather Min in the garden, the two of them watching dragonflies dart above the flowers. "The children don't talk to each other," she whispered. Min nodded slowly, his weathered face thoughtful. "It's the way of the world now. Everyone is too busy. But family cannot be too busy for family," Lan said, almost pleading. Her voice cracked with emotion. "We're still here. But for how much longer? And when we're gone, what will be left between them?" Min reached for her hand, squeezing it gently, but he offered no answer. That weekend, Huang suggested a family outing. "Let's go to the park," she said brightly. "We can have a picnic. Just us." Tuan clapped his hands in excitement, but Mai groaned. "I have homework. And anyway, I don't want to sit on grass like a little kid." Nam hesitated. He had deadlines, but he saw the hopeful look in his wife's eyes. "Maybe next week," he said finally. Huang's smile faltered. "Next week," she repeated softly, knowing well that next week would be no different. Tuan lowered his head, pushing his toy car across the table in silence. The old house seemed to absorb the weight of these moments. The walls held whispers never spoken. The stairway echoed with footsteps that carried frustration instead of joy. Even the air felt heavier, as though the silence itself had substance. And yet, beneath all the unspoken distances, love still lingered muted, hidden, desperate to be acknowledged. Grandmother Len prayed quietly each night, her hands folded, her lips murmuring in the dim light. She prayed that something, anything, would bring her family back together. What she didn't know was that her prayer would soon be answered, but not in the gentle way she imagined. Change was coming, and it would begin with a moment none of them expected.
That evening, he arrived home past 9 p.m. The house was dark except for the faint glow of the television. Hung had fallen asleep on the couch, a blanket draped loosely over her shoulders. Nam paused, guilt pricking at him again. She must have waited for him. Quietly, he switched off the TV, adjusted the blanket, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. From upstairs came the faint sound of music, Mai in her room again. Nam hesitated at the bottom of the staircase, debating whether to knock on her door. He imagined her rolling her eyes, telling him she was busy. He turned away, retreating to his study instead. On his desk lay unpaid bills, project blueprints, and a half-empty cup of cold coffee. He dropped into the chair, burying his face in his hands. "I'm failing them," he thought bitterly. "I'm failing everyone." 2 days later, Nam attended Mai's parent-teacher meeting, though reluctantly. He arrived late, slipping into the classroom with his tie loosened and his hair disheveled. Mai's teacher, Miss Thursday, greeted him with a polite smile. "Mr. Nam, thank you for coming. I wanted to discuss Mai's progress. She's intelligent, but lately, distracted. Her grades have slipped." Nam frowned, folding his arms. "Distracted how? She doesn't seem engaged. She often looks tired in class. And, she told me once that her parents don't really listen when she tries to talk at home." The words struck Nam like a hammer. His jaw tightened. He wanted to defend himself, to explain that he was working hard for his family, that he was doing his best. But deep down, he knew the teacher was right. When he returned home that evening, he found Mai in the kitchen, pouring herself a glass of water. "I went to your school today," he said quietly. Mai froze, then sighed. "I know. Miss Thursday said you would. She told me your grades are slipping." "So what?" Mai snapped. "It's not like you care. You don't even notice when I pass or fail." Her words cut deeper than she realized. Nam's lips parted, but no sound came out. He wanted to tell her that he cared more than she knew, that every hour of overtime was for her future. But standing there, tired and heavy, he couldn't find the right words. Mai stormed past him, retreating to her room. The slam of the door echoed through the old house. Nam stood in the hallway, staring at the wooden floorboards. For the first time in years, he felt tears sting his eyes. That night, he sat in the garden with his father. The moonlight cast silver shadows across the flowers. "You look troubled," Grandfather Min said gently. Nam exhaled heavily. "I'm trying so hard, Father. I work every day, every night, to provide for them. But the harder I work, the further away they seem. My thinks I don't care. Hung is always tired. Tuan. I barely talk to him." His voice cracked. "Am I a failure as a father?" Min leaned on his cane, gazing at the stars. "When I built this house, I worked long hours too. There were days I didn't see you or your brothers until late at night. But I learned something." He paused, his voice carrying the weight of experience. "A house can shelter a family, but it cannot hold them together. Only love, shown every day, can do that." Nam swallowed hard, his throat tight. "You must find balance," Min continued softly. "Work feeds the body, but love feeds the soul. And children, they hunger for love more than anything else." Nam lowered his head, silent. Deep inside, he knew his father was right. But finding that balance felt impossible, like trying to hold water in his hands. Still, as the night breeze rustled the leaves, a seed of resolve began to take root in Nam's heart. He didn't know how yet, but he would try. The old house watched quietly, its windows glowing faintly in the moonlight. Within its walls, a father carried the heavy burden of responsibility, and the even heavier burden of love left unspoken. Little did Nam know, his breaking point was closer than he thought. Hung woke before the rest of the family, as she always did. The sun had barely touched the horizon, yet she was already in the kitchen, her hands moving mechanically, washing rice, cutting vegetables, setting water to boil for tea. The house was still quiet, filled only with the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of roosters from neighboring yards. She liked this hour. It was the only time she had for herself, though she rarely used it to rest. Instead, she used it to prepare. By the time the others stirred, the kitchen would be alive with steam and aroma, as though meals could somehow stitch together the frayed threads of her family. Hung wasn't just a mother. She was the invisible pillar holding everything upright. When the light bulbs burned out, she replaced them. When bills were due, she reminded Nam to pay. When her children needed supplies for school projects, she found the money, even if it meant skipping something for herself. And yet, no one noticed. Not really. After breakfast, Nam hurried out the door, already on his phone. Mai grabbed a piece of toast, muttered by without eye contact, and vanished with her headphones. Tuan at least kissed his mother's cheek, but even that was hurried, his backpack bouncing as he dashed out to meet his friends. Within minutes, the house was quiet again. Hung sat at the table, staring at the half-empty plates. She reached for her tea, but her hand trembled, and she quickly set the cup down before it spilled. Her eyes burned, but she blinked the tears away. "You don't have time to cry," she told herself. "There's laundry to do. Dishes. Shopping. Work." So she moved again, sweeping floors, folding clothes, answering emails from her small office job. She carried out each task as though it were a shield, protecting her from the ache in her chest. That afternoon, she visited the market. The vendors greeted her with warm smiles. "Good morning, Sister Hung." "The usual today?" She smiled back, polite and gentle, but always reserved. Few of them knew her beyond the surface. To them she was the reliable woman who bought fish every Thursday, who bargained kindly but never harshly, who carried heavy bags without complaint. On the way home, her arms straining with groceries, Hung paused to watch another family walking together, a father holding his daughter's hand, the mother laughing beside them. The girl pointed at a balloon vendor, and the father immediately bought one, tying it carefully to her wrist. Hung's chest tightened. She remembered when Mai was little, tugging at her hand, begging for sweets. Back then, Hung would laugh, give in, and watch her daughter's joy light up the street. Now, Mai barely looked at her, as though she were a stranger. She blinked quickly, forcing the memory away, and continued walking. That evening, after the chores were done and the children were in their rooms, Hung sat alone at the dining table. A pile of school forms lay before her, needing signatures and fees. She wrote Nam's name where it was required, though he wasn't there to sign. From the garden, she could hear her parents-in-law speaking softly. Their voices carried a mix of nostalgia and worry. She knew they sensed the distance too, but like her, they didn't know how to bridge it. Hung pressed her palms against her eyes, her breath shaky. Why does it feel like I'm carrying this house on my shoulders alone? The tears finally came, quiet and hot, sliding down her cheeks. She buried her face in her hands, careful not to make a sound. No one could see her cry. She had to be strong, for Nam, for Mai, for Tuan, for the grandparents. If she broke, who would hold everything together? But strength, she realized, was lonely. The next morning, as Hung walked Mai to the bus stop, she tried once more to reach her daughter. Mai, your teacher says you're falling behind in class. Is everything all right? Mai shrugged, not looking at her. I'm fine. You can talk to me, you know. About school. About friends. About anything. Mai pulled her headphones over her ears, muttering, you wouldn't understand. Hung's chest ached. She wanted to shout, I understand more than you think. I was your age once. I had dreams, fears, heartbreaks too. But the words stuck, trapped behind the wall that had slowly risen between them. So she only whispered, I'm always here if you need me, though she wasn't sure her daughter even heard. That night, Nam returned late again. Hung waited for him with dinner reheated, but he barely touched the food. I'm tired, he said, rubbing his forehead. I know, she replied gently. But maybe tomorrow, can you spend some time with Mai and Tuan? They miss you. Nam sighed. I'll try. Hung wanted to say more, to tell him how much she missed him, how she longed for the days when they laughed together in their small kitchen, dreaming about the future. But she saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight he carried, and swallowed her words. She smiled instead, though it didn't reach her eyes. Rest well. When Nam fell asleep in the armchair, Hung stood beside him, watching his peaceful face. Her hand hovered as if to brush his hair back, but she pulled it away before touching. She went into the kitchen, turned off the light, and leaned against the counter. Silent tears welled again, slipping down her cheeks unnoticed. In the garden, the moon hung high, casting pale light on the flowers. Grandmother Lon, watering her plants, glanced at the window where Hung stood. She saw the bowed shoulders, the stillness, the way Hung's hand covered her face. Lan's heart clenched. She knew those silent tears well. Hung thought no one noticed. But the old house did. The walls, the windows, the very floorboards seemed to absorb her sorrow, holding it quietly like all the other unspoken pains within its heart. And though she carried her burdens in silence, the cracks in her strength were beginning to show. The house waited, as if bracing for the storm that was soon to come. Chapter 5: The Children's Rebellion. Teenage years are often turbulent, and in the old house, the storm was already brewing. Mai, at 16, felt trapped between the walls of tradition and the pull of the outside world. She wanted freedom, to go out with friends, to make choices without constant lectures. Every rule her parents set felt like a chain. Every reminder to study felt like a criticism. One Friday evening, she stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her blouse. A message buzzed on her phone. Party tonight. Everyone's coming. Don't be late. Mai, Hung called from the hallway. Have you finished your homework? Mai rolled her eyes. I'll do it later. When she walked toward the door with her bag, Nam intercepted her. Where are you going at this hour? Out with friends, she answered, her tone clipped. Not tonight, Nam said firmly. You have school tomorrow. And you know the rules, no going out late. It's just one night. Mai snapped. Why don't you ever trust me? This isn't about trust. It's about responsibility, Nam replied, his voice rising. You don't even know me, she shouted. You're never home. You don't care what I do unless it makes you look bad. The words hit Nam like a slap. His face tightened, but before he could respond, Mai stormed upstairs, slamming her bedroom door. The house shook with the sound. Meanwhile, 12-year-old Tuan had his own quiet rebellion. He wasn't loud like Mai, but his heart brimmed with frustrations he didn't know how to express. At school, he often felt invisible. His classmates teased him for being quiet, for drawing instead of playing soccer. At home, he felt invisible too, his stories brushed aside, his accomplishments unnoticed. One afternoon, when Hung asked him to help water the garden, he muttered, "Why don't you ask Mai? Nobody cares what I do anyway." Hung froze, taken aback by the bitterness in his tone. "Tuan, that's not true," she said gently. "Yes, it is," he burst out. "Dad never looks at me. You're always busy. Mai doesn't want me around. I'm just nothing." Then he ran to his room, slamming the door just as his sister had the night before. The grandparents noticed everything. Grandmother Lan often lingered by the hallway, listening to the muffled arguments, her heart heavy. Grandfather Min shook his head sadly, leaning on his cane. "These children are losing their way," Lan whispered one evening as they sat in the garden. "And the parents, they are too tired to see it." Min sighed. "The world is different now. In our time, children obeyed. But maybe obedience without love is not enough." The rebellion grew in small ways. Mai started skipping dinners, claiming she had too much homework. She spent hours on her phone, scrolling through social media, comparing her life to the glittering images of others. Sometimes she snuck out to meet friends, leaving Hung pacing the floor with worry. Tuan withdrew further. He stopped showing his drawings. He spent more time alone, building little forts in his room as though trying to create a world where he belonged. Hung tried to bridge the gap. She knocked on Mai's door with a plate of sliced fruit. "Eat something, Khan," she said softly. "I'm not hungry," Mai replied without looking up from her screen. Hung turned to Tuan, kneeling beside his bed. "Can I see what you're drawing?" "It's not good," he muttered, hiding the paper. Hung kissed his forehead anyway, though her heart ached. One Sunday morning, Nam decided to take control. He gathered the family at the dining table. "We need to talk," he began. His voice was firm, but his hands trembled slightly. "This family is falling apart. Mai, you cannot keep disrespecting us. Tuan, you cannot shut yourself away. We must remember our responsibilities." Mai crossed her arms, glaring. "You talk about responsibility, but you're never here. You think money is enough?" "It's not." Tuan whispered, almost too quietly, "She's right." The room fell silent. Nam's chest tightened. For a moment, he saw himself reflected in their eyes, not as a protector, but as a stranger. Hung reached across the table, her voice shaking. "Please, let's not fight. We can fix this." But no one answered. That night, Mai texted her friend again. "I hate this house. No one understands me. I just want to get out." Tuan lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He wished someone would knock on his door, sit beside him, and tell him he mattered. But the knock never came. The rebellion of the children wasn't just defiance. It was a cry for love, for connection, for something more than rules and routines. The old house held their voices, their slamming doors, their whispered tears. It knew that rebellion was only the surface of a deeper wound, a wound that, left untended, could break the family apart. Change was coming. The rebellion was only the beginning. Chapter 6, The Grandparents' Wisdom. The house was quieter than usual after the storm of arguments. But silence didn't mean peace, it was the silence of distance, of walls rising higher between hearts. Grandmother Lon and Grandfather Min could feel it in every corner of the home. One morning, Lon brewed tea in the old porcelain pot that had been passed down through generations. The scent of jasmine filled the kitchen as she called Hung to sit with her. "You look tired, Con Dao," Lon said softly. "Your eyes carry too many worries." Hung sighed, resting her chin in her hands. "I don't know what to do, me. My screams at me. Tuan doesn't talk to me. And Nam, he's so strict. It feels like I'm losing them all." Lon poured the tea slowly, her movements deliberate and calm. "Children's hearts are like young bamboo. If you bend it too hard, it breaks. But if you guide it gently, it will grow straight." Hung blinked back tears. "I try to be gentle, but sometimes they don't listen." "Maybe they don't need listening," Lon replied. "Maybe they need understanding." Later that afternoon, Grandfather Min found Nam in the courtyard, checking his motorbike. His son's shoulders were tense, his jaw set. "You look like you're carrying the whole mountain on your back," Min remarked, lowering himself onto the bench. Nam gave a faint smile. "It feels that way. I work all day to give them a good life, and still, they blame me. What more do they want?" Min tapped his cane on the ground thoughtfully. "When you were Mai's age, I worked in the factory from dawn to night. Do you remember how you used to wait for me at the gate?" Nam's face softened with memory. "I remember. I always wanted to ride on your shoulders when you came home. And do you remember what you once shouted at me?" Min chuckled. "You said, 'I don't care about your money. I just want you to stay home one evening to play with me.'" Nam lowered his eyes. The words pierced him because he remembered them. He had cried that night when his father left for another late shift. "Children don't count money," Min continued gently. "They count moments. You're giving them the life I couldn't, but don't forget to give them yourself." Nam swallowed hard. "I don't know if I still know how." "You will," Min said firmly. "Start small. A walk. A meal without phones. A story at bedtime. It's not too late." That evening, Lon and Min sat together in the garden, watching the sky turn orange with sunset. "These children are fighting because they love," Lon murmured. "They don't know how to say it, so it comes out as anger." Min nodded. "And the parents, they must learn again. We raised Nam with discipline, but now we must help him raise his own children with love." Lan's eyes shone with quiet determination. "Then we won't just sit and watch. We'll guide them, as elders should." The next morning, Lon called Mai into the kitchen. The girl arrived reluctantly, still annoyed from the last argument. "I don't want another lecture," Mai muttered. Lon smiled, handing her a bowl of fresh mango slices. "Good. I'm too old to lecture. I just want to tell you a story." Mai frowned but sat down anyway, picking at the mango. "When I was your age," Lon began, "I wanted to go to the city to study. But my parents said no. They said a girl's place was in the kitchen, not the classroom. I was so angry I didn't speak to them for weeks." Mai looked up, surprised. "Really? You were angry too?" "Oh yes," Lon chuckled. "But anger is just another way of saying, I want to be seen. My parents didn't see my dreams. That hurt more than their rules." Mai's eyes softened. "So what did you do?" "I studied at night, in secret. And one day, I proved to them that I was capable. They didn't stop me again." Lon placed her wrinkled hand over Mai's. "You don't need to fight us to be seen, Chow. You just need to show us who you are. We will listen." For the first time in weeks, Mai's defenses cracked. She blinked back tears, whispering, "Sometimes it feels like no one listens." I'm listening now, Lon said gently. Meanwhile, Min found Tuan sitting by himself under the big tamarind tree, sketching in his notebook. What are you drawing, little one? Min asked, settling beside him. Tuan tried to cover the page. It's nothing. Min chuckled. Nothing doesn't take that much concentration. May I see? Reluctantly, Tuan turned the notebook. It was a drawing of the old house, with each family member inside, Nam at his desk, Hung in the kitchen, Mai with her phone, and Tuan himself standing outside, looking in through the window. Min's heart ached. Why are you outside, Khan? Because that's how it feels, Tuan whispered. Like I don't belong. Min placed a hand on his grandson's shoulder. This house was built so that everyone belongs. Even when you feel outside, the truth is, you're at the center of it. Maybe your parents forget to say it, but I won't, you are important. Tuan's eyes widened. No one had ever said it so directly. Really? Really, Min said, pulling him into a hug. And I think your drawings are the doorway to your heart. Don't close it. For the first time in days, Tuan smiled. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Nam and Hung sat with Lon and Min. We can't force the children, Lon said. But we can guide them. Let them speak. Let them feel heard. And you too, Min added, must remember, family isn't built on rules. It's built on love. Rules without love are walls. Love without rules is chaos. Balance them. Nam looked at his wife, then at his parents. He felt the weight of his mistakes, but also the light of hope. Perhaps it wasn't too late to change. In the stillness of that night, the grandparents' wisdom lingered like a gentle lamp glow, soft, steady, and guiding the way forward. The rebellion of the children was not the end. It was an invitation. And with the elders' guidance, maybe the family could find their way back to one another. Chapter 7, The Father's Awakening. Nam lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. His father's words echoed in his mind, children don't count money. They count moments. For years, he had convinced himself that working harder was the best way to love his family. Each overtime shift, each late return, was proof of his sacrifice. Yet when he looked into Mai's angry eyes and Tuan's wounded silence, he saw something else. His absence had left them starving, not for food or comfort, but for him. The next morning, Nam did something unusual. He left work early. As he walked through the neighborhood, the setting sun cast a golden light on the narrow streets. He passed a group of children playing badminton, their laughter filling the air. He thought of Tuan, always sketching alone. He thought of Mai, scrolling through her phone instead of laughing with friends at home. When he arrived at the house, Hung looked up in surprise. You're home, so early? Nam nodded. I wanted to eat dinner together. Hung's face brightened with relief. Good. The children need this. Dinner began awkwardly. Mai sat with her phone beside her plate, scrolling. Tuan picked at his rice without a word. The grandparents exchanged knowing glances but said nothing. Nam cleared his throat. Put your phone away, Mai. She frowned, ready for another fight. But Nam's voice was softer this time. Not because it's a rule. Because I want to see you. Just for one meal. Mai hesitated, then slowly slid the phone into her pocket. Nam turned to Tuan. What did you draw today? Tuan blinked in surprise. You want to see? Yes, Nam said sincerely. I want to know. Tuan ran to fetch his notebook and handed it over. Nam studied the sketches, houses, trees, a few portraits. Some lines were shaky, but the detail was remarkable. These are beautiful, Nam said honestly. You have a gift, Tuan. The boy's eyes lit up as if someone had finally opened a locked door inside him. For the first time in months, the dinner table filled with real conversation. It was clumsy, filled with pauses, but it was a beginning. Later that evening, Nam knocked on Mai's door. She opened it reluctantly, expecting another lecture. But Nam just held out a small box. "I found this at the bookstore," he said. Inside lay a simple journal with a floral cover. "You said no one listens. Maybe writing here will help. If you want to share, I'll read. If not, it's still yours." Mai looked at the journal, then at her father. Something in her chest softened. She didn't say thank you, but she didn't slam the door either. The next weekend, Nam surprised everyone again. Instead of rushing off to work, he announced, "Today, no one is busy. We're going for a family walk." Mai groaned. "Seriously?" "Yes," Nam said firmly, but with a smile. "Seriously." They strolled down the riverside path, the grandparents leading slowly, Hung holding Tuan's hand, Mai walking a step behind with her arms crossed. At first, the silence felt heavy. But soon, Tuan pointed to a street musician playing the bamboo flute. "Can I draw him later?" "Of course," Nam replied warmly. Mai noticed the way her brother's eyes sparkled when Dad answered. She glanced at Nam, half skeptical, half hopeful. Then Nam did something unexpected. He bought a balloon from a nearby vendor and handed it to Mai. She raised an eyebrow. "I'm 16, Dad. Balloons are for kids." Nam chuckled. "Then carry it for me. Maybe I'm the kid who wants it." Despite herself, Mai laughed, a real laugh, light and surprised. It startled everyone, even her. That evening, Nam sat with his parents on the porch. It felt good, he admitted. To be with them. "I had forgotten how." Lon smiled softly. "The heart remembers when you let it." Min added, "You're learning, Khan. Keep going." But awakening wasn't instant. The next week, Nam came home late again after a sudden meeting. Mai rolled her eyes, muttering, "Same old Dad." He felt the sting but didn't retreat into silence this time. Instead, he sat beside her and said, "I'm sorry. I couldn't avoid it today. But tomorrow, I'll be here." To his surprise, Mai only nodded. That small gesture felt like forgiveness. One night, Nam found Tuan asleep at his desk, pencil still in hand. The sketchbook lay open to a picture of their family sitting together at dinner, smiling. Nam's throat tightened. He gently lifted his son into bed and whispered, "I'll be better, Khan. I promise." Nam's awakening wasn't about grand gestures or perfect parenting. It was about small choices, coming home early, listening instead of commanding, laughing instead of lecturing. Slowly, the children noticed. Slowly, trust returned. The man who had once been just a provider was learning, at last, how to be a father. Chapter 8: The Mother's Silent Strength. If Nam's awakening came with bold steps, leaving work early, speaking openly, making gestures of change, Hung's strength showed itself in quieter ways. Her love had always been constant, but now, she began to find her own voice, not just as a wife and mother, but as the anchor of the family. Hung had always been the one who patched things together, Mai's broken shoes, Tuan's torn notebooks, Nam's wrinkled shirts. But lately, she realized that patching wasn't enough. The family needed more than repairs, they needed guidance, patience, and a steady presence to remind them of who they were. One evening, after dinner, Hung noticed Mai retreating upstairs again. Instead of letting her go, she followed. "Can I come in?" she asked gently, knocking on the door. Mai shrugged. "If you want." Hung entered and sat on the edge of the bed. The room smelled faintly of perfume and notebook paper. Mai was flipping through the journal her father had given her, but she quickly closed it. "You don't have to hide it," Hung said with a small smile. "I used to write in a diary when I was your age too. I still keep it, actually." Mai looked at her, surprised. You? You wrote about, what? Everything, Hung chuckled softly. About wanting freedom. About how unfair my parents felt. About boys I liked and dreams I had. I thought no one understood me either. My bit her lip. So what changed? Hung leaned closer. I realized my parents weren't perfect. They were just people. People who loved me but didn't always know how to show it. When I saw them that way, I felt less angry. For a long moment, Mai was quiet. Then she whispered, "Sometimes I feel like you understand me more than Dad does." Hung's heart ached, but she answered gently, "Then help me teach him. He's trying. But he needs you too." Mai didn't reply, but she didn't push her mother away either. That, for Hung, was enough. Meanwhile, Hung spent more time with Tuan. She knew her son's world was made of sketches and shadows, so she stepped into it carefully. One afternoon, she sat beside him while he drew. "That's beautiful," she said softly, pointing to the picture of a tree. "Why this tree?" Tuan shrugged. "It's strong. Even in storms." Hung stroked his hair. "You're strong like that too. But even strong trees need care." Tuan looked at her curiously. "Do you really think I'm strong?" "I know you are," Hung said firmly. "Because strength isn't about shouting or fighting. It's about staying true to yourself, even when others don't see you." Her words sank deep, and for the first time, Tuan leaned against her shoulder, letting her hold him. Hung also became the quiet bridge between Nam and the children. When Nam worried he was failing, Hung reminded him, "Every step matters. They notice more than they say." When Mai rolled her eyes, Hung whispered, "She listens more than she admits." When Tuan withdrew, Hung reassured, "He feels more than he shows." She carried their unspoken words back and forth, like a messenger of peace. But Hung's strength wasn't only in softness. Sometimes, she had to be firm. One night, when Mai snapped at her grandmother for reminding her to wash the dishes, Lan's face fell. Before anyone else could react, Hung spoke firmly. "Mai. You may feel angry, but you will not speak that way to Ba. Apologize." Mai's eyes widened, caught off guard by the steel in her mother's voice. "But..." "No excuses," Hung interrupted. "Respect is not optional." The room was silent. Finally, Mai muttered, "I'm sorry, Ba." Lan smiled faintly, accepting. Afterward, Hung hugged her daughter privately. "You don't have to be perfect, Khan. But you do have to be kind. Especially to those who love you." Mai didn't argue. Deep down, she knew her mother was right. As the days passed, the house began to feel lighter. Not perfect, but healing. One Saturday morning, Hung suggested a new tradition, family breakfasts. "Every Saturday," she said, flipping pancakes in the kitchen. "No rushing, no excuses. Just us." Nam raised an eyebrow. "Pancakes? Not rice?" "Sometimes change is good," Hung smiled. The children joined reluctantly at first, but soon the breakfasts became a ritual they looked forward to. Mai learned to flip pancakes without breaking them. Tuan added fruit designs on top. Even the grandparents enjoyed the novelty, laughing at sticky fingers and sweet syrup. Around that table, Hung watched her family laugh together again, and her heart swelled with quiet pride. Late one night, as Nam helped wash the dishes, he said softly, "I don't say it enough, but you hold us together. Without you, I think we'd all fall apart." Hung smiled, wiping her hands. "That's what mothers do. We hold the pieces until everyone remembers how to fit together again." Nam reached for her hand. "Thank you." She squeezed his fingers, her eyes shining. "Don't thank me. Just keep walking with me. That's all I ask." Hung's strength was not in grand speeches or dramatic gestures. It was in her steady patience, her quiet firmness, her endless ability to listen and love. She was the heartbeat of the home, the rhythm that guided them all back, again and again, to each other. And though she rarely spoke of it, she carried her own silent dream, that one day, her children would look back and remember not the fights or the struggles, but the love that had held them through it all. Chapter 9: The Family Crisis. Just when it seemed the family was beginning to heal, life tested them with a storm fiercer than any argument or silent distance. It began on a humid evening in late summer. Nam was driving home from work when the phone rang. It was Hung, her voice trembling. "Nam, it's your father." He collapsed in the garden. Nam's heart dropped. He raced home, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. When he arrived, the scene was chaos, neighbors helping to carry grandfather Min into a car, Lon weeping, the children pale with fear. At the hospital, doctors rushed Min into the emergency room. The family waited outside, the sterile smell of disinfectant filling their lungs, the clock ticking unbearably slow. Mai clutched her phone but didn't look at it. Tuan sat curled up against Hung, eyes wide with shock. Nam paced back and forth, his mind a storm of guilt. Finally, the doctor emerged. "It was a mild stroke," he said. "He will need rest, medication, and most importantly, less stress." Relief flooded the family, but it was fragile. The crisis was far from over. The days that followed tested everyone. Min returned home, but he was weaker. His steps faltered, his words slurred slightly. Lon stayed by his side constantly, but caring for him exhausted her. Hung took on extra responsibilities, medications, meals, doctor visits, while still tending to the children and house. Nam felt torn between work and home. Each time he left for the office, guilt gnawed at him. Each time he stayed home, financial worries grew heavier. And the children, they struggled too. Mai, seeing her strong grandfather suddenly fragile, felt fear she couldn't voice. She stopped sneaking out, but she grew restless, scrolling through her phone at night, hiding her tears. Tuan drew pictures of his grandfather in bed, his once sturdy figure now frail. He showed no one, but each line carried his silent dread: what if he doesn't get better? One evening, as the family sat down to dinner, Min tried to lift his chopsticks but his hand trembled too much. The rice slipped back into the bowl. "I'm useless now," he muttered bitterly. "No, Bo," Nam said quickly. "You're still the head of this family." Min shook his head. "What kind of head can't even feed himself?" Lon placed her hand over his. "You've carried us all your life. Let us carry you now." Tears welled in Min's eyes, though he turned away so no one would see. The stress began to wear on the family. One night, Mai snapped at her mother, "Why do I have to babysit Tuan when I have exams? I'm not the parent." Hung's exhaustion finally cracked. "Do you think this is easy for me? I am running this house alone while your father works, while your grandfather suffers, while everyone needs me. You think you're the only one who's tired?" The words hung heavy in the air. Mai stormed off, slamming her door, while Tuan silently cleared the dishes, his small hands trembling. Nam watched it all, helpless, realizing that the crisis was pulling them apart instead of closer. That night, Nam lay awake beside Hung. "We're falling apart again," he whispered. Hung covered her face with her hands. "I don't know how much more I can do, Nam. I'm trying, but I feel like I'm drowning." Nam pulled her close. For the first time in years, he admitted his own fear. "So am I." The next morning, something unexpected happened. Tuan appeared at the breakfast table with his sketchbook. "I want to show you something," he said nervously. He opened to a drawing of the whole family gathered around grandfather Min. Min was smiling in the picture, not weak but strong, with everyone's hands linked together. "This is how I want us to be," Tuan whispered. The room fell silent. Tears welled in Lan's eyes. Mai stared at the drawing, her anger melting into shame. Hung reached out and hugged her son tightly. It was a child's drawing, but it carried a message the adults had forgotten. Even in crisis, they were stronger together. From that day, the family shifted. Mai began helping more, not because she was forced, but because she realized her mother needed her. She cooked simple meals, cleaned the house, and sometimes even read aloud to her grandfather. Tuan became Min's little companion, sketching beside his bed and telling him stories about his drawings. The old man, though weakened, found joy in his grandson's imagination. Nam adjusted his work hours, choosing family over overtime. Money was tighter, but he felt richer in time spent together. And Hung, though still tired, found strength in their shared effort. She no longer carried the weight alone. One evening, as the family gathered in the garden for fresh air, Min spoke slowly but clearly. I thought this stroke was the end. But maybe it was a reminder. Life is short. Love each other while you can. The children sat quietly, listening. Even Mai, usually restless, stayed still, her eyes glistening. Lan squeezed her husband's hand. We will, Ong. We will. The crisis had shaken them, yes. It had brought fear, exhaustion, even anger. But it also stripped away illusions and forced them to see what truly mattered. Not grades. Not promotions. Not appearances. Just this, the fragile, precious gift of being together. And in that realization, the family found a new kind of strength, one that no storm could take away. Chapter 10, The Ties That Hold Us. The morning sun streamed softly through the curtains, casting golden patterns on the floor of the old family house. It was a familiar light, one that had touched the wooden walls for decades, but now it seemed warmer, brighter, almost as if it sensed the change within the home itself. For the first time in a long while, the house was alive with laughter. The kitchen buzzed with the clattering of pans and the aroma of fresh bread baking in the oven. Maria hummed quietly as she chopped vegetables, her eyes glowing with a serenity that had been absent for years. Thomas, standing beside her, stirred the soup with an ease that reflected not only his willingness to help but also his newfound determination to be more present in his family's life. In the living room, Anna and Ben sat cross-legged on the carpet with their grandfather. He was recounting yet another tale from his youth, his voice trembling with age yet steady with wisdom. Their grandmother sat nearby, knitting slowly, pausing occasionally to smile at the children's laughter. The distance that had once separated the generations seemed to vanish, in its place bloomed an intimacy both comforting and timeless. The breaking point of the past months had been painful. Thomas's exhaustion, Maria's silent tears, Anna's rebellion, Ben's confusion, all of it had weighed heavily. But when Thomas had collapsed from overwork and the family faced the terrifying possibility of losing him, everything shifted. The fragility of life had been laid bare, and with it, the realization that anger, pride, and misunderstandings were trivial compared to the irreplaceable bond they shared. Now, as they moved together through daily routines, those old wounds began to close. Forgiveness didn't come overnight, but it came in small gestures, a hand on a shoulder, an apology whispered late at night, a meal prepared with love, a story told with patience. Each act, no matter how small, was a thread that mended the fabric of their family. At dinner that evening, the entire family gathered around the long wooden table. The candles flickered softly, illuminating faces that seemed lighter, freer. Maria raised her glass of water and spoke, her voice filled with quiet conviction. We've been through so much, she said, glancing around the table. But I believe that's what makes us stronger. Family isn't just about living under the same roof, it's about choosing each other, again and again, even when it's hard. Thomas placed his hand over hers. I've realized something too, he added. All these years, I thought providing meant working endlessly, but I was wrong. Providing also means being here, being part of your lives. I don't want to miss any more moments. Anna looked at her parents with misty eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered. For shutting you out, for thinking I didn't need you. I do. I always will. Ben, trying to be brave, added softly, me too. I don't ever want us to fight like before. The grandparents exchanged a glance, their wrinkled faces glowing with pride and tenderness. This, the grandfather said, his voice firm despite his years, this is what life is truly about. Not wealth, not success, love. Love that binds us even when everything else falls apart. As the meal went on, the house seemed to breathe along with them. Every laugh, every story, every clink of glasses filled the walls with warmth. The old house, once silent and strained, now pulsed with harmony, as though it had been waiting for this very moment. Later that night, after the dishes were cleared and the children tucked into bed, Maria and Thomas stepped outside onto the porch. The stars glittered above them, vast and endless, and the cool night air carried the faint scent of jasmine. Thomas wrapped his arm around Maria's shoulders. Do you think we'll be okay? He asked quietly. Maria leaned against him, her gaze fixed on the horizon. We already are, she replied. Because no matter what comes, we'll face it together. Inside, the grandparents whispered goodnight to one another, their hands entwined as they drifted into sleep. Anna scribbled in her journal, writing about her dreams for the future, dreams that now included her family standing by her side. Ben hugged his old stuffed bear tighter, comforted by the thought that tomorrow would bring more laughter, more stories, more love. And so the night embraced them all, cradling the family in its gentle arms. The road ahead would not be perfect. There would still be challenges, disagreements, moments of doubt. But beneath it all lay something unshakable, something stronger than fear or anger, the ties that held them together. The ties of family. The ties of love. The ties that would endure, no matter what storms the future might bring.
Thanks everyone for listening.